So once again, in the skies over Baghdad, armed U.S. drones are flying again. They are meant to protect American interests on the ground as the militant Sunni group ISIS moves ever closer to the Iraqi capital. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch says ISIS is responsible for the massacre of at least 170 Iraqi soldiers. The group apparently analyzed photographs posted by the insurgents and compared them with satellite images to determine how many lives had been lost. Joining us now is Robert Riggs. He is an assistant professor of world religions at the University of Bridgeport, and he joins us from Connecticut. Professor, thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's confusing to an awful lot of us in North America. We have this spectacle in the Middle East. All the big players, Iran, Israel, Turkey, Egypt, they're watching the main event, which is Arab Sunni against Arab Shia, and it's a bloody war over Syria and Iraq. Most of us don't quite understand why they are fighting one another. Can you help us understand that, sir?
Yes. You know, this history really goes back to the Saddam Hussein regime when he privileged certain parts of the Sunni population, Arab population in Iraq, over the Shia in Iraq. And then after the invasion in 2003, the U.S. invasion, the Shiites were able to consolidate power over the government and predictably have marginalized many of the Sunni, politicians and members of that population in Iraq.
Sir, is it your sense that it's possible, under circumstances that are not extraordinary, for Shia and Sunni to coexist peacefully?
Absolutely. In fact, in Iraq itself, they coexisted for a very long time peacefully. Even under Saddam Hussein, most of them, there was much intermarriage, there was much peaceful coexistence. The problem is really more of the collusion of religion and politics here, a type of sectarianism where Shiite has now become synonymous with a specific ruling political group. Even though the Shiites themselves are incredibly diverse and not by any sense monolithic in Iraq itself.
Mm-hmm. Sir, given the history, is it fair for the West to demand, as has happened in both Washington and in London, for Baghdad to form an inclusive government that allows Shia and Sunni both to have a voice?
Well, I don't know about demand is the right word, but I definitely think that's something that should be encouraged. And I think that's recognized amongst Iraqis across the political and ethnic and religious spectrum in Iraq. I mean, just about everyone is calling for this, including some of the main opposition Shiite parties, such as the Islamic Supreme Council in Iraq and Muqtada Sadr and his faction. I mean, everybody is pretty much calling for, and the Kurds as well in the north, are calling for there to be a more broad-based coalition government.
I remember in the early days of the war, the civil war in Syria, which we have now come to understand is all part of the same war, the one in Iraq and Syria, that we were holding out for a negotiated settlement. It was time for you guys to get together, put your heads together, work this thing out, and stop the fighting. Is that still possible in this part of the world?
Well, Syria and Iraq now, you're exactly right. They're very much integrated into the same problem. The porous border, the fact that ISIS is actually controlling the border between Syria and Iraq now, which virtually erases the border. I see the problem more as being a problem between ISIS and both the governments in Baghdad and Damascus. I mean, there are other factions, but they're being, stomped out in some ways or marginalized by ISIS. So is it possible? I mean, it's possible, but perhaps what we're seeing is the potential for a long-term, peaceful coexistence between the Iraq and Syrian governments.
Robert Riggs is at the University of Bridgeport. Professor, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.